Rust Creek Massacre, Beneath the Gods Beyond the Prison. The Thing Beneath the Gods. The smile was the last human thing Evan saw. It did not belong to him. It belonged to the god. Stone cracked further as the chamber trembled, and the ancient smile widened, not with joy, but with recognition. The symbol on Evan's arm burned hotter, no longer a mark, no longer a warning, but a key fully turned. "You were never meant to resist," the god's voice echoed, not spoken but remembered, pressed directly into Evan's thoughts. "You were meant to arrive." The floor split open. Below the altar, beneath the gods, beneath the myths that had haunted Rust Creek for centuries, something older shifted in its sleep. The pale figures, the forest watchers, fell to their knees in unison, their bodies convulsed as if pulled by invisible strings, their hollow mouths opening in silent reverence. This was not their master. This was their fear. Evan staggered backward as the chamber expanded impossibly, stone walls peeling away into a vast black abyss. The gods, those towering statues of bone and forgotten worship, began to crumble. Cracks raced across their forms as red light poured out, draining downward like blood into a wound that would never close. "They sealed us from it," the god snarled, its voice no longer calm. "And now you have broken the seal." Evan's memories ignited, not his own. He saw men in robes beneath a newborn forest, their hands soaked in blood, chanting not prayers but apologies. He saw the first pact carved into living flesh, the first bearer screaming as the mark was burned into his arm. He saw Rust Creek founded not as a town, but as a lock. The thing beneath the gods was not worshipped. It was contained. The abyss breathed. A sound rose from below, slow, vast, patient, the sound of something that had waited long enough to forget what mercy was. Evan fell to his knees as gravity itself bent toward the darkness. His mark flared, tearing his skin open as ancient light poured from his veins, forming chains of burning symbols that reached downward, desperately trying to hold the abyss closed. "I won't be your vessel," Evan whispered, teeth clenched against the pain. The god laughed. "You already are." The chains snapped. From the darkness, eyes opened, not glowing, not burning, watching. They were so large Evan couldn't comprehend their shape, only their presence, pressing against reality like a hand against thin glass. The forest above screamed as roots tore free from the earth, dragged downward toward the opening. Trees collapsed, soil collapsing into the widening wound beneath Rust Creek. The god began to retreat, stone form crumbling as it backed away from the abyss. "This was never our war," it hissed. "We were only wardens." The truth struck Evan harder than the pain. The gods were not villains. They were guards. And now the prison was open. The abyss spoke, not in words, in ending. Evan felt his name unravel, his past thinning, his future collapsing into a single point of inevitability. He understood now why no one ever truly escaped Rust Creek. They weren't killed. They were fed. With the last of his strength, Evan plunged his burning arm into the widening rift, screaming as the mark consumed him. Light and darkness collided, ripping through the chamber in a shock wave that shattered stone, gods and myth alike. For a moment, just one, the abyss recoiled, and then it reached back. The forest went silent. Above, Rust Creek stood empty, unaware that something had shifted beneath its soil, not sealed, not destroyed, but aware. And far below, where even the gods dared not look anymore, the thing beneath them all began to rise. Slowly, patiently, knowing Evan would not be enough. Evan's scream tore him back into himself. Pain returned first, then weight, then breath. He was lying on cold stone, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked gasps. The air tasted old, not stale, but remembered, as if it had been trapped underground long before lungs were meant to fill it again. Above him, the sky was wrong. It was not the sky of Rust Creek. There were no stars, no moon, no clouds. Instead, a vast fractured dome stretched endlessly, glowing faintly with lines of ancient symbols that pulse like veins beneath translucent skin. He pushed himself up, his arms screaming as the mark burned brighter than ever. It no longer looked like a symbol. It looked like a wound that refused to close. "Where am I?" Evan whispered. The answer did not come as a voice. It came as understanding. This was not beneath Rust Creek. This was before it. He stood at the edge of a colossal structure, a circular construct of stone, bone, and something darker, something that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. At its center yawned the same abyss he had seen before, but now it was smaller, tighter, bound by layers upon layers of sigils and geometric restraints. This was the prison, not the one he knew, the first one. Figures moved around the structure, humans, unmistakably human, dressed in primitive robes, their faces carved with terror and resolve in equal measure. And among them stood the beings Evan had once thought of as gods. Up close, they were not divine. They were exhausted, cracked, bleeding light, afraid. "You see now," said a voice behind him. Evan turned. A man stood there, older than Evan, younger than the memory itself. His arm bore the same mark, but faded, scarred, as if it had been burned and reburned 1,000 times. "The prison was never meant to last," the man continued. "Only long enough." "For what?" Evan asked. "For you." The man gestured toward the abyss. It woke before we were ready. Reality tore itself trying to contain it. The gods, if you still want to call them that, were the first responders, not the architects. Evan's stomach twisted. "Then who built this?" The man smiled sadly. "We did." Memory unfolded again. Human minds, fragile but inventive, discovering that belief could shape symbols, that pain could anchor meaning, that blood could bind what stone could not. They wove themselves into the prison, generation after generation, each bearer a living stitch holding reality together. Rust Creek was never chosen by chance. It grew around the wound. "And now," Evan asked, already knowing the answer, "now the prison has outlived its makers," the man said, "and the thing inside has learned patience." The abyss pulsed. Something inside shifted, not rising, not reaching, simply adjusting, as if aware of Evan's presence in a way that went beyond sight. Evan felt its attention brush against him. He collapsed to his knees. It did not hate him. It did not hunger. It expected him. "You are not the first," the man said quietly, "but you will be the last chance." Evan looked at his burning arm. "What happens if I refuse?" The man's voice trembled. "Then it will not escape." A pause. "It will expand." Silence fell heavy between them. "And if I accept?" Evan asked. "There will still be a prison," the man replied, "but it will no longer be a place." The truth settled like a blade between Evan's ribs. "You're saying the prison becomes me." The man nodded. "Or what remains of you." The symbols above them began to fracture, hairline cracks spreading through the glowing dome. The gods looked up in unison, fear returning to their ancient faces. "The seal is failing," the man said urgently. "You don't have much time." Evan stood. For the first time since arriving in Rust Creek, his hands stopped shaking. He stepped toward the abyss. The closer he came, the quieter the world became. The pulsing slowed. The symbols dimmed. Even the gods retreated, unwilling to stand where he now stood. At the edge, Evan looked down. There was no shape, no form, just endlessness, pressing upward against existence itself. "I won't be your vessel," Evan said aloud, his voice steady. The abyss responded, not with words, but with agreement. Evan understood. This was not possession, it was occupation. He raised his marked arm. The symbol tore free from his skin, unfolding into burning geometry that wrapped around his body, piercing deeper than flesh, deeper than bone. Pain exploded, then vanished, replaced by clarity so sharp it nearly broke him. Evan stepped forward, and reality closed behind him. The structure sealed, the dome solidified. The gods fell silent. The man with the scarred arm was gone. Far above, in a forest called Rust Creek, the ground stopped trembling. The trees stood still. The wind returned. The town survived. But something fundamental had changed. Deep within the prison, awareness settled into a new shape, one that remembered being human. And somewhere beyond the boundaries of time, something else noticed. Something that had not been part of the original pact. Something that had been watching all along.